Welcome to Joint Session, Diverse Voices in New York State Cannabis. I'm Herb Barbot, former and first Director of Operations at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. This podcast brings together policymakers, regulators, licensees, advocates, and industry leaders to talk through the realities of building a cannabis market in New York and what those lessons might mean beyond the state. In Season 3, we continue the conversation while we celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. We look at how policy translates into practice and how practice may impact policy. Through it all, businesses must navigate change, all while trying to prepare for where the industry may be headed next. We aim to bring you thoughtful, candid discussions about what's working, what's evolving, and what still needs to be figured out. Thanks for joining us, and now here's the episode. My guest in today's Licensee Highlight episode is Vanessa Yi Chan, founder and CEO of Alta Dispensary here in New York City's Great Chinatown. Vanessa is also the founder of Twinkle's Play Space in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. She's also a founding member of the Cannabis Retail Alliance of New York, as well as a member of the Asian Cannabis Roundtable. Welcome, Vanessa. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. So Alta's Dispensary's home, the building in which it was housed, has a remarkable origin story. Your grandparents purchased it 50 years ago. Can you take us back to that chapter of your family's history and tell us how that came to be?
Yeah, so my grandparents were refugees from Mozambique. They lived in Africa up until obviously there was a coup, I think in 74. And so it turned communist. And so they knew that they had to get out. So basically they ended up in New York. Everyone kind of spread out from their community. It was a small Chinese community in Beira in Mozambique. And so they ended up here. With the money, literally they left in the middle of the night. They had their suitcases and they pretended they were going on vacation, but just never looked back. They had a business there, they had property there, but they needed to leave. So it was just becoming very, very dangerous. So they ended up here and they bought, and so the dispensary that I have the building in is the first building that they purchased. And so it was kind of, so when I came into it, I've kind of managed it for the past 10 or plus years or so. I really, during the time when I started looking into legalization, this is back around 2020, 2021, it was COVID. So I was like, retail is dying, like we need something in here. And I had only recently found like cannabis in general later in life, in my late 30s or so. And I was like, this is something that I love. I think that it's so great. And I use it for sleep and anxiety. And I was like, this would be a great thing to kind of marry the two together and to have a sustainable business and retail brick and mortar space that is something that's different and unique. But then building on that, I wanted to make it really unique and different, even in the dispensary kind of crowd of it. So kind of focus more on intentional use. So my store is laid out by moods.
And we'll get back to that. You're jumping way ahead of my question.
But so that's really kind of like the whole reason. It's really building this business to sustain the building itself because it's my my grandparents' legacy. I really needed something that could sustain the building. I have still a lot of people who are rent controlled, rent stabilized. So I've known them for 40 years. They've seen me grow up. And so, having that to balance out that with the, increased taxes and the increase in utilities and all that stuff, I needed something that could, do well, that would, succeed and kind of benefit the building. So that is kind of really where this whole kind of journey started and where I have ended up so far.
And Mozambique was a Portuguese colony. And the name Alta means high in Portuguese and actually high in Spanish as well.
Spanish as well, yeah.
Yeah, which speaks directly to your multicultural roots. So how did your background, straddling Chinese heritage, an African diaspora story, and then of course a New York upbringing, how did that shape who you are personally, and even professionally?
I think it's, the big understanding the kind of European and Asian influences in my life, I think is very important. It really speaks to being a New Yorker, living and born and raised in in New York, it's really that diversity that really comes together and like showing that like you can obviously I had a really good basis to succeed, but taking that a step further, like having that diversity and having that diverse background kind of allows me to communicate with a lot of different people. I do speak Spanish, so I do use it every day. A lot of my employees are Latino or, and stuff like that. And so I do use that as an advantage because I feel like culturally, like I do have the Asian background, but in terms of like dynamics with the people, like I do really are more in tune with, the Latino kind of culture and things like that. So I feel like I have the really best of both worlds where the temperament and I guess the business sense of like the Asians and being part of this community. I also speak Chinese, so like it's that combination. And but then at the same time having the dynamics and understanding that the background of, the Hispanic, Latino culture and stuff like that here.
No, and it really is what makes New York City such an incredible place.
Hmm.
So now, before you began your career in cannabis, you were in real estate, property management, marketing. You had this Twinkle's Play Space that you founded in Williamsburg. So how did all these experiences prepare you, or even maybe not prepare you for
Oh
running a
yeah.
dispensary?
Well, I think from background wise, so I used to be in public relations. I used to work for beauty products. I did a lot of product launches, so event planning. So that, had a strong sense of events and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then with Twinkle, which is still running today, it's about customer service. So it's been running for about 13, 14 years. And so that is all about customer service. It's about custom birthdays and really appeasing the clients and things like that. I think for me, it was about bringing those kind of two aspects where the dispensary, you'll see aspects of that where my staff is really trained for hospitality. And that was my whole thing is like customer service and hospitality. And that's what makes a good retail store. It's that connection. On volume of sales or upsales, but like the connectivity and recommending people the right stuff because that's that integrity and intention. And it's like you'll bring back those customers because you are truly recommending something that you believe that would fit them, not necessarily just something that's the highest thing or the most expensive thing. So that customer service I learned from Twinkle, just
Hmm.
being genuine and being like, yeah, let's, like, and really paying attention to those needs of the client. And then on the other side, events like incorporating events into the dispensary to use as a marketing tool, so coordinating Uno nights and Mahjong nights and stuff like that, which is what I have in store to kind of bring the community together and also to, just use as a tool for social media, marketing, things like that.
Yeah, no, and I have not, unfortunately, been to your store, but I've seen the pictures, and it really does look like a beauty store, like a Sephora type of environment. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, it's really like too, like standing out
Mhm.
in that crowd of
Mhm.
what dispensaries are right now. I really wanted to have a place that I would feel comfortable shopping in. And that's what a lot of people do feel that that happens and stuff like that.
So you were among the first wave of license applicants that got approved. That besides the card applicants without the prior cannabis conviction. Can you walk us through that licensing process? What were the biggest obstacles that you had to deal with in navigating that process?
Yeah, I mean, everyone really had a some type of issue. It wasn't ever an easy, straightforward kind of process. Deficiencies, the initial application was relatively easy. There is a lot of like technology stuff that you need to like kind of click through and stuff like that. But what I found was really getting to know and networking with people in the OCM and really kind of having that background helped me navigate who to reach out to for, resolving some of the issues that I had in my application. There were some errors that I really pursued and investigated that were found false so that I was able to achieve, get the license in full. So there were a lot of obstacles that but I did the work to
Mm-hmm.
investigate and to prove, otherwise whatever deficiencies that they were saying. For my location specific, it was about a proximity with another, quote unquote dispensary. However, after researching and it was invalid,
Mhm.
and there was no lease on that other thing that would encroach on my territory. But it took me just doing
Right.
the work. And I think that's a lot in this industry is that a lot of people expect things to come to them and they're, oh, like that's not fair or that's a
Mhm.
thing. But you need to push forward to be able to, do the work yourself, do the
Right.
legwork, do the research yourself. And you can get the answers. They are out there. You just need to do the work.
Right. No, no, and I've heard of licensed applicants that went out and hired, surveyors, right, to
Yeah,
come in and actually prove that, that this
exactly.
distance was what they thought it was and not what OCM thought that it was. So,
Correct, yeah. So
yeah.
all that is just takes the initiative of the person that's
Mhm.
the applicant. So I did use a lot of that and just connections in general, just by networking in advance and preparing this whole time, for the things from 2021 and to 23. I was just out there just building
Mhm.
my network and trying to kind of find who would, just by even meeting Dutchy reps
Mhm.
and like we mentioned, these people that were really coming into the industry and building this market.
Mhm. Now, you've spoken about the challenge of introducing legal cannabis to New York's Asian community.
Hmm.
So, what did stigma look like in that, specific cultural context, and what approach have you taken to address it with your neighbors and customers in New York's Chinatown?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was well, at first when during my application and especially to the community board, I was getting letters of support. And I started with the building, of course, well, the neighbors are going to be above there. They really didn't have many issues with it. A lot of the people were kind of open to it. However, in terms of like the olders, is they don't exactly understand it, but I think that it's kind of like in this Asian community in Chinatown, they kind of mind their own business for the most part, the older generation. I think the newer generation is a little bit different. The people who came from or who are supporting a lot of the nonprofits and things that are going on here now. But I have, I worked with Send Chinatown Love. Now I work with Heart of Dinner to kind as my
Mhm.
nonprofit to kind of contribute monies back to them. I also, for my events, I'm having Mahjong night, incorporating the culture and the trends, of course, of having a game night open to everybody. And we do get a lot of neighborhood people who are just want to learn mahjong and not necessarily weed, but it's the
Mhm.
normalization of
Right.
having these events in the store to kind of make it so it's not as stigmatized.
And do you get those older neighbors coming in to play mahjong?
Sometimes we do.
Mhm.
We actually have people who travel from, outside of like in Brooklyn or things like
Mm.
that when they see these mahjong events and like older ladies who come and who are just into mahjong and they're like, "Oh, it's free and we can go play and meet new people." And so it's not just in this area, but more outside of the area. But in terms of the age, I mean, we do have neighbors coming in just curious. And we have a lot of that where they come in and just curious as to what we do and all that stuff. And we're totally open to that. I don't think they're necessarily purchasers, but the fact that they're even coming in
Right.
to ask questions and things like that, that is just like helpful because obviously they're not users at this.
Right. No, and step by step, right?
Yeah. It's the optics of it, right? Of
Mhm.
all of this. I mean, it's normalizing it and making it accessible to neighbors and, being very transparent about what it's all about.
So rather than organizing products, by brands or consumption method, as most dispensaries do, Alta organizes its offerings around what customers are hoping cannabis will do for them, right? So you have sections on rest, chill, relief, focus, vibe. How did you decide on that model, and how does it change the customer experience on the floor?
I really wanted, well, I thought of it in this way, like as a first consumer, right? Like a new consumer. Like if you didn't understand what a vape is, what a pre-roll does, what an edible does, and all that stuff, and you're brand new to the market and you don't know what you want it for, I think that's where I started getting into the intentional use of it. So really kind of being used it for sleep and also my personal experience because that's how I use it. So I was like, there has to be a way. And I started talking to other people who were opening dispensaries. And I know that, and obviously going around the country to kind of look at different dispensary
Mm.
stores, I didn't really see this where it was so focused on the intentional use. There
Mm.
are some that I did visit that had an idea of it, but it wasn't really so specific and so defined. And so I took that and really went with it. And I was like, whatever, I'll see if it works. If not, we can always change it. It's fine. Well, like we can, make the sections into organized by pre-rolls and all that stuff or whatever that is, or the brands or whatever. The other thing was that I also tried not to focus on any specific brand. So I don't group it by brands because from the beginning, most people don't know what brands there were going to exist anyway. So they wouldn't, it doesn't matter if it's Dizzy, it doesn't matter because they won't know at all.
Yeah.
And my whole goal as a target demographic was the new cannabis consumer that is going to open this up to. It's not the people who already have a dealer because I feel like those people are going to continue with that. It's that new generation of cannabis consumers that are just learning about it. They don't not necessarily have a dealer, but they've smoked before, but they don't, they're here just to kind of like casually use it, not, kind of things. And then that would also ultimately draw some of the people who are heavy users,
Mm.
and having that range of products too is really important, having the low THCs to the high THCs to accommodate a wider range of people and not always just focusing on the high potency, high this, high that, because there is a, I even have CBG flower, so it's non-psychoactive. So having
Mm.
that leveling up kind of style, I felt like is more appropriate for the new cannabis consumer that's going to be coming on with this new market.
But that also sort of also goes with the consumer, excuse me, the consumer education that you decided to focus on. So why was education such a large part of your design?
Well, if I'm looking at my target demographic, as a new cannabis consumer, they're not going to understand any of that stuff. And as we know, cannabis in general and the endocannabinoid system is very complicated to explain to people in general. So I think it was a combination of educating people, those newcomers, to understand what and how these affect you and how the different even minor cannabinoids can affect you and how
Mm.
they tailor these products to fit certain moods and needs. And it's funny because as we are getting into the market more and more, now brands are focusing
Mm.
more on intentional mood-based effects, which is not so easy for me to categorize now because it's like calm is going to be in the calm section because they even label it that way.
Mm.
So it's really about kind of tailoring that to the that target demographic that I was always looking for. And education was such a big part of that because they just don't understand and they don't know.
And do you have customers that are returning and then, sort of telling you about what their experience was with the product that they purchased and what they're looking forward to next?
Yeah, absolutely. We've become kind of like the coffee shop of weed. We have customers who come in every day for the same things, and if
Mhm.
there's whatever product or the same types of strains and things like that. And my budtenders kind of like no, they're like, oh, here's your sour diesel that you kind of want, or your pre-roll, kind of thing. So we do have those regular customers that are always coming back for very similar or same kind of strain types and terpenes that they've experienced before. So that's really great, and the fact that my staff can easily be like, hey, welcome back, and here's your product, and so that is that integrity, that is that, intentional thing, and suggesting something that's even, $8 pre-roll versus, something that's 16 because the $8 is what works for them.
No, and as a consumer of anything, right? It's always great when you walk into an establishment and they remember you,
Yeah.
and they remember that you were there before. So, you've also said that you wanted to create a space where women's consumption no longer has to be discreet. What do you think has historically kept women from feeling welcome and visible in cannabis spaces?
I think part of it is number one is the stigma, the stereotypes of traditionally who smokes, and I think wine and alcohol has been the go-to for a lot of women and housewives and soccer moms and things like that. But I personally I don't drink, so that was also why when I found it I was like, this is what I've been looking all my life. So I think it was part of it is that huge stereotype, that huge stigma
Mm.
that is around cannabis, just in the culture of it all, as we all know. And you can see that with other dispensaries as well. It's very that the bro culture, and no shade to them at all, because everyone has their market. And I just wanted to lean into more accepting of women to consume it. Because I think that is something that is so it's not spoken of about enough. And especially if drinking is not your thing and want another type of release. I mean, I really smoke to kind of relax for the day. And so I smoke at night, right before kind of bed, and just to kind of wind down because my thoughts are everywhere and I'm always multitasking. So I think sharing that educational piece with people and sharing that my own passion with people, because that's how I consume it. I was like, why haven't people talked about this more? And as a woman, I feel like it's helped me in so many different ways, not just smoking, but like, even topicals and things like that that can really help relieve some of the things that we go through, as women. So I think all of that combination really like helped me kind of tailor the store to accommodate that.
So beyond retail, what role do you think dispensaries can and possibly should be playing in women's health education? That maybe the mainstream healthcare system hasn't really served well.
I think it's just about alternative ways to I guess you could say medicate, or as a wellness product to as we're going through, as we're getting older, and people, as our bodies change and stuff like that as women, it is difficult to address some of the things, like it's even perimenopause and menopause and all those things that we go through as we're getting older. And I think that some of the things that cannabis can be used for to treat the symptoms of that is not necessarily addressed in mainstream Western medicine, because obviously there's no medication. There are some medications out there, but I tend not to like to use those because the dependency and like cost and all those things, and some things that I just don't feel is as necessary. If I have weed, I feel like I use that more to kind of treat my symptoms
Hmm.
more than anything else, and it's worked for me. So that it's just closing that gap in a more holistic way, I feel like, because the plant it is still a plant, and using that in certain of, and as opposed to a pharmaceutical drug.
Yeah. And do you see yourself having these discussions, or your bartenders having these discussions with women when they come into the store?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely a big part of that was like, that as a common complaint is sleeping. So insomnia, so that is one thing. The other thing that I've heard a lot of is even menstrual pain, cramps, things like that. And we have great products that have been developed. I know Eaton Botanicals has their Galpal really works for a lot of people. Even people who come in there have endometriosis, and they use that and it works for them. So, these things are being asked,
Hmm.
and we do have solutions for people that have really helped them. So it's nice to have that, closing that gap without using like pharmaceuticals.
Ah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So now you've outlined plans for Alta's expansion alongside its mission to empower women, destigmatize cannabis use. What do you see Alta and yourself over the next few years?
I don't know. I'm really playing it by ear. It's a very volatile market, I feel like. So it's very hard to see where I'm pushing, where we're gonna go next, because the instability of the industry is still really, rampant, and it's very hard to forecast anything moving forward with a
Hmm.
lot of regulatory issues that are coming down the pipeline that really can affect how the business is going to succeed in the future. And
Hmm.
so it's a very, it's very unstable, I think. And, obviously it's going to take, I mean, it'll probably take up to 10 years to really stabilize this market in general. Like, I think in terms of long terms, I mean, but in the meantime, that's why I think it's challenging to kind of forecast any of that right now.
All right. Well, Vanessa, it's been a great pleasure to speak with you today. Where can people learn more about Alta Dispensary? Maybe come visit you, hopefully come visit you, and the
Yeah.
work that you're doing.
Yeah, so our website is altadispensary.nyc. You can also find it Alta Dispensary on Instagram, and we're located on 52 Kenmare Street in New York, between and Elizabeth, so we're right in this Chinatown, Soho, Nolita area.
Mhm.
So yeah, stop by.
A great place to visit. I mean, just three great neighborhoods.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we get so many tourists, and it's a nice kind of juxtaposition of all the kind of areas coming together, and so it's a very nice, it's a great neighborhood, really, and it's just so many things going on all the time here.
All right. Well, thank you for your time today. Vanessa Yi Chan, founder and CEO of Alta Dispensary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Joint Session, Diverse Voices in New York State Cannabis. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps more listeners find the show. In addition, please share this episode with colleagues, advocates, and anyone interested in the state of cannabis in New York. Joint Session is produced by me, Herb Barbot, together with executive producer Robert Curtis from Simlev. You can follow Joint Session on Instagram at jointsession.pod, on Blue Sky at jointsessionpod.bsky.social, and on LinkedIn at Joint Session Podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions on topics, reach out to me at herb.jointsession@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Herb Barbot. Thank you for listening.